In the modern era, the existence of only one human species, Homo sapiens, feels like a natural constant. However, looking back through millions of years, this solitude is a historical anomaly. For the vast majority of our evolutionary history, the Earth was home to a diverse array of humans, ranging from small-brained tree climbers to robust, large-brained hunters. Understanding this complex history requires first acknowledging that the biological species concept, the idea that a species consists of individuals that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring, is often insufficient when applied to the fluid nature of evolution and the fragmentary fossil record. Instead, paleoanthropologists utilize up to 26 different definitions of species to categorize the remains of our ancestors. Drawing from the provided sources, this essay explores the 13 recognized species of humans that once roamed our planet. The journey of the genus Homo began approximately 2.8 million years ago with a transitional fossil jaw that bridged the gap between the earlier Australopithecines and the first humans. While evolution is a flowing stream of mutations rather than a series of abrupt jumps, Homo habilis is widely considered the first true human species, appearing roughly 2.3 to 2.5 million years ago. These handy men possessed brains 40% larger than their predecessors and were the first to manufacture complex Oldowan-style tools. Despite their human-like morphology, they were small and likely spent significant time in trees to avoid predators. Living alongside them was Homo rudolfensis, a mysterious contemporary that appeared around the same time. While sometimes debated as a potential Australopithecine, rudolfensis was significantly larger than habilis and boasted a 20% larger brain, though it is generally viewed as an evolutionary offshoot rather than a direct ancestor to modern humans. A pivotal shift occurred around 2 million years ago with the emergence of Homo ergaster in Africa. This species was a primary ancestor for nearly all later humans and was the first to reach a physical size comparable to modern humans. Their most enduring legacy was the invention of the Acheulean tool industry, distinctive oval and pear-shaped hand axes that required significant skill to produce. Many researchers consider Homo ergaster to be the African variant or subspecies of Homo erectus. Homo erectus stands as one of the most successful human species, surviving for nearly 2 million years and spreading across the Old World. They were pioneers of technology, credited with the controlled use of fire, the creation of clothing, spears, and even early art. Their brain sizes varied wildly across geography and time, from a mere 600 cubic centimeters in the Georgian subspecies H. erectus georgicus, to an impressive 1,250 cubic centimeters in later populations in Java, nearly matching the average modern human. As Homo erectus expanded, new lineages began to diverge. In Western Europe, Homo antecessor appeared about 1.2 million years ago. Though their name suggests they are ancestors, they are now viewed as a dead-end lineage that died out approximately 800,000 years ago. Following them was Homo heidelbergensis, which evolved around 600,000 years ago. Often associated with European remains, they were the direct ancestors of the Neanderthals and displayed remarkable sophistication. They crafted advanced wooden spears capable of being thrown over 30 meters, coordinated complex hunts, and may have been the first hominins to possess true language. Meanwhile, in Africa, Homo bodoensis, previously classified under other names, emerged as the African counterpart to heidelbergensis. These humans are our direct ancestors and were highly advanced, providing the oldest known evidence of hafting, attaching stone points to handles, roughly 500,000 years ago. The latter half of the Middle Pleistocene saw the rise of the most famous extinct humans, Homo neanderthalensis. Appearing around 300,000 years ago, Neanderthals were shorter and stockier than their ancestors, adapted for the cold climates of Europe and Asia. They were highly intelligent, pioneering the Levallois and later the Mousterian tool industries. At various points, their technology was even more complex than that of our own ancestors. Homo sapiens appeared roughly at the same time in Africa, characterized by a more rounded brain case and a lighter, gracile skeleton. It is hypothesized that as our brains reorganized for increased cooperation, our physical muscular strength reduced. While sapiens eventually dominated the globe, they were not the only humans remaining. In South Africa, the enigmatic Homo naledi lived alongside our ancestors. These humans possessed a mosaic of traits with primitive small brains, 460 to 610 cubic centimeters, and bodies adapted for both tree climbing and upright walking. Despite their small brains, evidence suggests they may have practiced intentional burial in deep cave systems, a behavior previously thought exclusive to large-brained humans. Simultaneously, in Asia, the Denisovans roamed. Known primarily through DNA and fragmentary remains, they were close cousins to Neanderthals. A related discovery, Homo longi, or dragon man, recently revealed a massive skull with a brain volume of 1,420 cubic centimeters, suggesting a sophisticated Asian lineage that might eventually be linked to the Denisovans. Finally, the sources highlight the fascinating phenomenon of island dwarfism in Southeast Asia. On the island of Flores, the hobbit species, Homo floresiensis, lived until about 50,000 years ago. Standing only 1 meter tall with brains the size of a chimpanzee's, they nevertheless used fire and hunted tiny elephants. Similarly, Homo luzonensis inhabited the island of Luzon in the Philippines. Like the hobbits, they were small and possessed a mix of ancient and modern traits, including features adapted for climbing trees, likely as a result of convergent evolution in an isolated environment. In summary, current evidence suggests there were at least 13 distinct species of humans throughout history, with a potential 14th if Homo longi is classified separately from Denisovans. The most diverse period in our history likely occurred within the last 300,000 years, a time when sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, Homo naledi, Homo floresiensis, and Homo luzonensis may have all existed concurrently. This rich tapestry of human life eventually faded, leaving Homo sapiens as the sole survivors of a once crowded evolutionary tree. We stand today as the beneficiaries of millions of years of innovation and adaptation by our many lost cousins. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, close your eyes. Let the heavy curtain of the present day fall away, softening the sharp edges of your room until there is only the rhythmic cadence of my voice and the velvet dark of your own imagination. We are going to drift backward, far beyond the noise of cities and the hum of electricity, to a time when the night sky was a terrifying, beautiful map of unwritten constellations. As we embark on this long, slow unraveling of our family tree, it is important to sit with the feeling of that illusion of solitude we just spoke of. It feels quiet now, doesn't it? Just us. But this silence is a deception. If we were to compress the Earth's history into a single day, our loneliness would be a fleeting second near midnight. For the rest of the day, the world was a crowded, boisterous house of cousins arguing over the best way to chip a rock or chase a gazelle. The difficulty in counting them, was it 13, 14, 20, lies in the very nature of time itself, which erodes certainty just as it erodes bone. You see, nature does not respect the clean labeled boxes we try to force upon it. The biological species concept, championed by Ernst Mayr in the 1940s, works wonderfully for living finches or fruit flies where we can watch them mate, but it fails us when we hold two fossilized teeth separated by 10,000 years of silence. We cannot ask the bones who they loved, and so we rely on the morphological species concept, a fancy way of saying we squint at shapes in the dust and guess where one family ends and another begins. This leads to the great gentle war of the lumpers and the splitters, historians and scientists who either group fossils together to simplify the story or split them apart to honor every variation. It's a bit like trying to decide if a slightly lumpy pillow is a new type of furniture or just a well-loved version of the old one. Tonight, we are splitters. We will walk the path of diversity, honoring each distinct face that once looked up at this same moon, feeling the cold wind of the Pleistocene on skin that was not quite ours, yet deeply, profoundly human. Breathe in that ancient air. The journey begins. The mist clears over the Great Rift Valley, revealing a landscape in the throes of a dramatic transformation, a world where the lush, comforting canopy of the ancient rainforests is beginning to tear apart like worn fabric, exposing the golden, unforgiving hide of the open savanna. It is here, roughly 2.8 million years ago, that the plot of our family history thickens, shifting from a tale of tree-dwelling apes to something startlingly new, something that stands on the precipice of humanity and dares to look down. We find ourselves in the early Pleistocene, a time when the earth began to cool and dry, forcing our ancestors to make a choice that was not really a choice at all: adapt or vanish into the fossil record. Out of this climatic pressure, Cooker emerged a creature that paleoanthropologists officially crowned as the first member of our own genus, Homo. We call them Homo habilis, or handyman, a name that sounds a bit like they were the neighborhood's go-to repair crew for leaky caves and broken sticks, though their reality was far more precarious. They appear in the fossil record roughly 3 to 2.5 million years ago. But their story actually begins with a single, fragmentary jawbone found in Ledi-Geraru, Ethiopia, dating back 2.8 million years, a transitional whisper that connects the more primitive Australopithecines, think of the famous Lucy, to the lineage that would eventually lead to you and me. Imagine standing in the tall, swaying grass of East Africa, the air thick with the scent of wild sage and the musk of large, grazing beasts. If you were to spot a group of Homo habilis moving through the brush, your first instinct might be confusion. They are small, standing only about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, roughly the size of a modern 9-year-old, though perhaps with better survival instincts and significantly less homework. Their arms are long, dangling past their knees, a lingering memory of the millions of years their ancestors spent swinging through branches. If you looked into their eyes, you would see a face that is still distinctly ape-like, with a protruding jaw and no chin to speak of. Yet there's a spark there, a glint of calculation that marks a profound departure from everything that came before. The most defining feature of Homo habilis, the trait that allowed them to crash through the cerebral Rubicon, a theoretical line scientists once drew to separate ape from human, was their brain. At roughly 600 cubic centimeters, their brains were about 40 to 50% larger than those of the Australopithecines. It was a modest upgrade by modern standards, roughly half the size of yours, but in the evolutionary arms race, it was a superpower. It allowed them to do something revolutionary. They began to see potential where others saw only debris. This brings us to their most enduring legacy, the reason for their handy nickname, the Oldowan tool industry. Before habilis, tools were likely limited to unmodified sticks or stones, used briefly and discarded. But Homo habilis possessed the cognitive leap required to pick up a river cobble, visualize a sharp edge hidden inside it, and strike it with a hammerstone at a precise angle to release a flake. Clack. That sound, the rhythmic percussion of stone on stone, was the heartbeat of a new era. These tools were not lovely. To the untrained eye, an Oldowan chopper looks like a broken rock you might kick aside on a hiking trail. But these broken rocks were the Swiss Army knives of the Paleolithic. With a sharp flake, a habilis individual could slice through the thick hide of a wildebeest carcass, accessing meat that other scavengers couldn't reach. They could smash open heavy bones to get at the nutrient-dense marrow inside, a rich, fatty superfood that acted as rocket fuel for their expanding brains. It creates a beautiful, self-reinforcing loop. Better tools lead to better diet leads to bigger brains, and bigger brains lead to better tools. It is a slow-motion explosion of intelligence. However, we must be careful not to romanticize them as conquerors of the savannah. They were not the hunters, they were the hunted. Historians and anthropologists emphasize that Homo habilis was likely a scavenger, a small, scrappy opportunist who had to wait for the lions and hyenas to finish their meals before darting in to steal a few scraps. The terror of their lives is hard for us to truly grasp in our comfortable beds. The nights were dark and full of teeth. At this time, predators like Denisovans, a terrifying false saber-toothed cat, prowled the darkness, specializing in hunting primates. Because of this, Homo habilis almost certainly did not sleep on the ground. When the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the African sky in bruised purples and blood reds, they would have scrambled up into the safety of the trees, building nests in the branches just as chimpanzees do today. They were humans by day, apes by night, living in a suspended state of existence between two worlds. This duality makes their classification tricky, a point that scholars still argue over with polite but firm intensity. Some researchers, looking at the long arms and small stature, argue that Homo habilis should actually remain in the genus Australopithecus, that they are too primitive to wear the Homo badge. They suggest that including them in our genus broadens the definition of human too far, making it a wastebasket taxon where difficult to classify fossils are tossed. Yet, the majority view holds. The brain expansion and the stone tools are the ticket into the club. They represent the moment our lineage decided that biology wasn't enough, that we needed technology, even if just a sharp rock, to survive. It is a humbling thought, isn't it? To think that the foundation of all our skyscrapers, our poetry, and our space stations rests on the trembling, calloused hand of a 3-foot-tall scavenger nervously chipping a rock while watching the grass for leopards. They were vulnerable, fragile, and essentially an underdog story in the grand biological narrative. But they had something their rivals didn't, the ability to manipulate the world to suit their needs. And they weren't alone in this endeavor. As we watch the habilis fade back into the acacia groves, clutching their precious stone flakes, we notice movement elsewhere in the Rift Valley. The stage was not theirs alone. Evolution, in its infinite creativity, was running more than one experiment at a time. Just as habilis was mastering the art of the scavenger lifestyle, another figure was emerging from the shadows, a contemporary who challenges our simple linear understanding of monkey to man. This figure was larger, more mysterious, and possessed a face that looks almost like a flat mask. As the habilis clan huddles together in the moonlight, listening to the roar of the savannah, they are unaware that just across the lake, a cousin is walking a different path, one that will leave scientists baffled millions of years later. The dawn of the handyman was bright, but the morning of humanity was far more crowded than we ever imagined. The wind shifts now, carrying us north across the hot, shimmering expanse of the East African Rift to the shores of a vast jade-green body of water, known today as Lake Turkana, but once called Lake Rudolph. It is here, in the sun-baked silt of Kenya, that the story complicates itself beautifully, shattering the simplistic idea that human evolution was a lonely single-file line. For a long time, scientists believed that Homo habilis was the sole actor on the stage during this period, the only game in town between the apes and the later humans. But in 1972, the ground whispered a different secret. A team led by Richard Leakey discovered a skull, catalogued simply as KNM-ER1470, that refused to fit the mold. It was a jigsaw puzzle of hundreds of bone fragments that once painstakingly glued back together, a task that surely required more patience than assembling flat-pack furniture without instructions, revealed a face that was hauntingly different. This is Homo rudolfensis, appearing roughly 2.4 to 1. 8 million years ago, this mysterious contemporary walked the same earth as the handyman, drank from the same watering holes, and likely watched the same sunsets. Yet they were distinct. If Homo habilis was the scrappy, small-bodied underdog, Homo rudolfensis was the robust, enigmatic stranger. The most striking difference was the brain. While habilis was breaking boundaries with a brain size of around 600 cubic centimeters, rudolfensis boasted a cranial capacity of roughly 750 to 775 cubic centimeters, a staggering 20% larger. In the world of paleontology, that is not a margin of error. That is a chasm. Along with this impressive engine, They possessed a face that was longer, broader, and flatter, described by some anthropologists as having a dish-like mid-face, lacking the heavy brow ridges that would characterize later humans. They were bigger too, standing perhaps 5 feet tall or more, towering over their smaller cousins like a varsity athlete standing next to a middle schooler. The existence of Homo rudolfensis throws a wrench into the neat gears of the ladder of progress theory. For years, a fierce scholarly debate raged. Could these two simply be the male and female versions of the same species? In nature, sexual dimorphism can be extreme. Just look at the difference between a male and female gorilla, but statistical analysis eventually ruled this out. The differences in skull architecture and tooth size were too profound to be explained away by gender alone. No, the consensus today leans heavily toward the idea that two distinct species of early Homo lived side by side in the Rift Valley. This realization forces us to imagine a world that feels almost like a fantasy novel, where different types of humans coexisted in an ecological balancing act. How did they manage it? Historians and ecologists suggest the concept of niche partitioning, a survival strategy where neighbors agree to ignore each other's dinner reservations. While Homo habilis might have been generalists, scrambling for scraps and fruit, the large jaws and teeth of rudolfensis suggest they were processing tougher, harder foods, perhaps chewing through fibrous plants or cracking open nuts that habilis couldn't handle. They lived in the same neighborhood but shopped at different grocery stores. It is a peaceful image to hold in your mind as you drift deeper into relaxation. Two different kinds of human ancestors, perhaps crossing paths by the lake edge. Did they nod in recognition? Did they fear one another? Or did they simply watch with the indifferent curiosity of animals that know they are not competing for the same slice of the pie? Despite their larger brains and robust bodies, Homo rudolfensis remains a ghost story. We have no postcranial bones, no arms, no legs, no feet that we can definitively link to the skull, leaving us to guess at how they walked or how agile they were. They appear in the fossil record, tease us with their advanced brain size, and then, around 1.8 million years ago, they vanish. They are generally viewed today not as our direct grandfathers, but as an evolutionary offshoot, a cousin lineage that experimented with being human in a slightly different way, only to reach a dead end. They remind us that having the biggest brain isn't always the golden ticket to long-term survival. Sometimes, adaptability beats raw processing power. The tragedy of rudolfensis is the tragedy of all lost potential, a biological experiment that was working perfectly well until the world changed just enough to make it obsolete. As they faded, the stage was cleared for a new arrival, one that would not just survive, but dominate. Around 2 million years ago, as the waters of Lake Turkana lapped against the shore, the climate began to dry further, the forests retreating like a receding tide. The era of the tree climbers was ending. The tall grass of the open savanna was calling for a different kind of walker, a traveler who could leave the safety of the branches forever. And so, from the genetic streams of Africa, a new figure stepped forward, taller, leaner, and armed with a wanderlust that would eventually conquer the world. The twilight of the mystery humans gives way to the first true stride of the giants. The curtain of the forest has finally fallen. We are no longer peeking through the dense, tangled greenery that cradled our earliest ancestors. Instead, we step out into the blinding golden vastness of the Pleistocene savanna. The air here is different, drier, hotter, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain. The safety of the trees is gone, and in this exposed world, a new kind of human rises to meet the horizon. Around 2 million years ago, the Rift Valley gave birth to Homo ergaster, the working man. If you were to stand next to them, the shock of recognition would be immediate and profound. Gone are the short, ape-like proportions of the handyman. Gone are the long, dangling arms suited for swinging. Homo ergaster stands tall, reaching heights of nearly 6 feet, with long, slender legs designed for one specific, revolutionary purpose: walking. They are the first of our kind to look undeniably like us. If you were to shave a Homo ergaster, dress him in a modern suit, and place him on a busy subway train, He might still garner a few stares for his heavy brow ridge and lack of a chin, but he wouldn't cause a panic. He would simply look like a quiet, somewhat intense commuter. This physical transformation was not merely aesthetic, it was an urgent survival strategy. As the African sun baked the landscape, Homo ergaster shed the thick coat of body fur that had kept their ancestors warm. In its place, they developed naked, pigmented skin capable of a biological miracle: sweating. This sounds trivial. We sweat when we are late for a meeting or stuck in traffic. But in the animal kingdom, it is a superpower. Most predators, like the leopard or the lion, must pant to cool down, which limits how long they can run. Homo ergaster, cooled by a glistening sheen of perspiration, became the ultimate endurance athlete. They could hunt in the scorching heat of midday, chasing prey for miles until the animal collapsed from heat stroke. It is a haunting image, a silent, relentless pack of humans trotting rhythmically under the zenith sun, armed not with claws but with stamina and stubbornness. We know so much about them thanks to a heartbreakingly beautiful discovery made near Lake Turkana in 1984. There, eroding out of the sediment, was the Turkana boy. He was a youth, roughly 8 or 9 years old when he died, yet he already stood 5'3". His skeleton is nearly complete, a rare gift from the deep past that allows us to look at him and feel the weight of his humanity. He likely died of a tooth infection, a simple ailment that today would be cured with a pill, but then was a sentence of death. In his fragile remains, we see the narrowing of the hips and the barrel shape of the rib cage, proving that he no longer needed a massive gut to digest raw vegetation. His body was built for a high-energy fuel, meat and marrow. To acquire this fuel, Homo ergaster invented the second great leap in technology, the Acheulean tool industry. While the handyman's tools were simple sharp flakes, Homo ergaster created the hand axe. Imagine a stone shaped like a large teardrop, or a pear, chipped on both sides to create a symmetrical razor-sharp edge. This was not just a tool, it was a concept held in the mind. To make one, you cannot just bash rocks together. You must visualize the shape inside the stone before you begin, a leap in abstract thought that marks a new level of consciousness. These hand axes were the Swiss army knives of the Pleistocene, used for butchering, digging, and woodworking. They were so effective, so perfectly designed, that they remained the dominant technology for over 1 million years. It is a bit of a running joke among anthropologists that if Homo ergaster had a motto, it would be, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." For 50,000 generations, the teardrop shape remained virtually unchanged, a testament to a tradition passed down from parent to child with sacred precision. The rise of ergaster also hints at a softening of the social fabric. Historians and biologists note a significant reduction in sexual dimorphism, the size difference between males and females. In many primate societies, giant males fight for dominance over harems of smaller females. But in Homo ergaster, the males were only moderately larger than the females, similar to modern humans. This subtle shift in bone size whispers a revolutionary story of behavior, the beginnings of pair bonding, of fathers who stuck around, of a society built less on brute dominance and more on cooperation. It is possible that this is where the first seeds of love, as we understand it, began to sprout in the harsh soil of the savannah. Yet, even with these advancements, there is a fog of debate that surrounds them. Science is rarely tidy, and historians still argue whether Homo ergaster is truly a distinct species or simply the African version of Homo erectus. Many lumpers prefer to call them African Homo erectus, seeing a seamless lineage that eventually spilled out of Africa. However, splitters argue that the thinner skull bones and slight differences in the brow of ergaster warrant a separate name, honoring them as the distinct ancestors who stayed behind to tend the African cradle while their cousins wandered north. As the sun sets on the era of the Turkana boy, we see a species that is restless. They have mastered the body. They have mastered the stone. The horizon is no longer a limit, but an invitation. The long legs of Homo ergaster were not made for standing still. They were made for the journey. And what a journey it would be. As the population grew and resources thinned, small bands began to drift. They followed the herds, they followed the rivers, and they followed the stars. They walked out of the Rift Valley, across the bridge of the Sinai, and into the unknown vastness of the old world. They were carrying a torch, metaphorically, and perhaps soon, literally. The working man was about to become the upright man, the conqueror of continents, the tamer of the most terrifying force in nature. The African chapter closes gently, and the global epic begins. The horizon widens, stretching until it encompasses nearly the entire globe. We have left the cradle of the Rift Valley far behind, following a lineage that possessed an insatiable hunger for the unknown. This is the era of Homo erectus, the upright man, a species so wildly successful that they make our own modern reign look like a brief, chaotic weekend. Appearing around 2 million years ago and vanishing only about 110,000 years ago, they walked the earth for nearly 9 times longer than Homo sapiens has existed. If endurance is the metric of success, Homo erectus is the undisputed champion of the human race. They were the first true explorers, the Vikings of the Pleistocene, pushing their way out of Africa and into the chill of Eurasia, the humid jungles of Indonesia, and the vast plains of China. They did not just survive these new worlds, they terraformed their own existence to fit them. To understand them, we must look not just at their bones, but at the flickering golden light that danced in their eyes. For it was Homo erectus who likely gave humanity its greatest gift, a tool more powerful than any stone axe, the controlled use of fire. Imagine the first night the darkness was pushed back. For millions of years, the setting sun marked the end of activity. Night was a kingdom of fear, ruled by the prowling leopard and the pack-hunting hyena. Early humans were forced into silence and hiding, but with Homo erectus, the script changed. We do not know the exact moment. Perhaps a brave individual captured a smoldering branch from a lightning strike, or perhaps they learned to spark it from the friction of flint. But the result was an alchemical shift in the human experience. Fire was warmth in the biting winters of the north. It was a weapon that could be waved in the face of a snarling saber-tooth, but most importantly, it was an external stomach. This is the cooking hypothesis, a fascinating idea championed by biological anthropologists. Before fire, chewing raw meat and fibrous tubers was a calorie-burning marathon. A raw diet requires massive jaws and a long, energy-expensive digestive tract. By roasting meat and tubers, Homo erectus pre-digested their food, breaking down tough proteins and releasing nutrients that were instantly absorbable. This efficiency changed their bodies. Their guts shrank, no longer needing to be massive fermentation tanks, and the surplus energy was redirected upward, fueling a rapid expansion of the brain. You could say that the secret ingredient to building a human intellect was a good barbecue. But the campfire did more than feed the brain. It forged the soul. Think of the hearth. It is the center of the home, even today. For Homo erectus, the fire was the first school, the first theater, and the first church. It extended the day, creating a pool of light where the tribe could gather after the hunt. Here, in the safety of the glow, they likely looked at one another's faces and shared the first complex social bonds. Historians still argue whether they had complex language, but it is hard to imagine sitting around a fire for 1,000,000 years without eventually finding a way to say, "Pass the antelope," or "Did you see that mammoth?" The fire forced them to be social, to curb their impulses, and to bond. It turned a group of individuals into a community. While they were domesticating flame, they were also refining the art of travel. Homo erectus was the first human species to encounter the ocean and perhaps even cross small stretches of it, reaching the island of Java. The fossils found there, the famous Java man, and near Beijing, Peking man, reveal a species that was incredibly adaptable. Their brains grew over time, starting around 800 cubic centimeters and reaching up to 1,250 in later populations, overlapping with the lower range of modern humans. They were smart, capable, and possibly sentimental. There is a single shell from Java, etched with a geometric zigzag pattern by a Homo erectus hand 500,000 years ago. It is not a tool. It has no survival function. It is, perhaps, the oldest doodle in history. It suggests a mind that had a moment of quiet, a moment to create a pattern just for the sake of seeing it. It is a tiny, humanizing detail, a prehistoric sketch on a napkin that bridges the abyss of time. Yet, for all their innovation, there is a strange stagnation in their story that puzzles archaeologists. It is called the Acheulean stasis. For nearly 1,000,000 years, despite spreading across the world and taming fire, their stone hand axes remained almost exactly the same. They reached a level of perfection and then stopped inventing. It is a humorous contrast to our modern obsession with upgrading our phones every year. Homo erectus found a design that worked and stuck with it for 1,000 millennia. Some scholars suggest this points to a mind that was reliable and conservative, lacking the restless, chaotic creativity of Homo sapiens. They were the steady tortoises of evolution, not the erratic hares. They found a way to live in equilibrium with their environment, a balance we often struggle to achieve. Their physical diversity was also immense, a fact that confuses the classification even further. The lumpers argue that the vast differences we see, from the thick-browed skulls in Beijing to the more slender forms in Africa, are just regional variations of one global species, much like how modern humans vary in height and build. The splitters, however, see these differences as evidence of multiple distinct species hiding under the erectus umbrella. They argue that the Asian populations evolved independently from the African ones for so long that they became something else entirely. It is a debate that relies on how much variation you are willing to accept before you draw a line in the sand. But regardless of the label, the success of Homo erectus is undeniable. They were the pioneers who broke the invisible barrier of the tropics, learning to make clothes from hides to survive the frost of the temperate zones. They were the ones who looked at a dark cave and, instead of fearing it, lit a torch and claimed it as a home. As we visualize them, let us not see them as primitive brutes, but as the great stabilizers of our lineage. Imagine a Homo erectus elder, skin weathered by the wind of a dozen different climates, sitting by a fire that he built. He holds a hand axe that is identical to the one his great-grandfather held, and he is content. The flames crackle, sending sparks up into the same starry sky we watch tonight. He does not know that his descendants will one day walk on the moon, nor does he care. He has warmth, he has the safety of the group, and he has the roasted haunch of a deer. For him, the struggle of existence has been solved. But evolution is never truly finished. Even as Homo erectus settled into their long, successful reign, the genetic code was quietly twisting, preparing to produce new variations that would challenge the status quo. On the fringes of their empire, in the remote valleys of the Caucasus and the cliffs of Europe, strange new faces were beginning to appear. The stability of the upright man was about to be tested by the chaotic diversity of his own children. The fire had been lit, but the story was far from over. The wind howls a little louder here, whistling through the craggy peaks of the Lesser Caucasus Mountains in the modern-day Republic of Georgia. We have traveled far from the sun-drenched savannas of Africa, crossing land bridges and skirting the edges of ancient seas to arrive at a place called Dmanisi. It is a location steeped in a peculiar kind of poetry, a site where history is stacked in literal layers like the pages of a discarded book. On the surface, you find the crumbling stone walls of a medieval fortress, a remnant of the Silk Road where traders once stopped to rest their camels. But beneath the cellar floors of this medieval castle, buried under the debris of knights and merchants, lies a secret that is nearly 1.8 million years old. This is the home of the Georgian hominins, sometimes classified as Homo erectus georgicus, and they are arguably the most confusing, controversial, and fascinating family portrait in the entire gallery of human evolution. Imagine standing on this promontory, looking out over a valley that was once a mosaic of forests and grasslands, teeming with saber-toothed cats, primitive wolves, and giant ostriches. It was here, in the 1990s and early 2000s, that archaeologists unearthed 5 skulls that would shake the foundations of anthropology. Usually, when we find fossils, They are separated by thousands of miles or millions of years, making it easy to put them in separate boxes with separate labels. But at Denisovans, the Earth played a trick. It preserved 5 individuals who likely lived and died within centuries, or perhaps even moments, of each other. They were neighbors. And yet, if you were to line their skulls up on a shelf, you might assume they belonged to entirely different species. One skull is robust, with heavy brow ridges and a face that looks like it was carved from granite. Another is small and delicate, almost like the earlier Homo habilis. A third, known famously as Skull 5, possesses a brain case so small, about 546 cubic centimeters, roughly the size of a large grapefruit, combined with a massive jutting jaw, that it looks like a primitive ape mask attached to a human body. The variation is staggering. It is as if you walked into a family reunion and found one cousin who looked like a linebacker, another who looked like a jockey, and a third who resembled a chimpanzee. Yet they all insisted they were siblings. This Georgian mosaic forces us to confront a difficult question. Just how different can individuals be and still belong to the same species? Historians and paleoanthropologists still argue whether the Denisovans fossils represent a single, highly variable population of Homo erectus, or if they are evidence that multiple species, perhaps habilis, rudolfensis, and ergaster, were all migrating out of Africa together. The current consensus, however, leans toward the single-species theory. It suggests that our ancestors were far more physically diverse than we give them credit for. Just as modern humans can range from petite and slender to tall and broad without being different species, these early pioneers carried a genetic elasticity that allowed them to take many shapes. It is a humbling reminder that nature loves variety and rarely adheres to the strict cookie-cutter definitions we write in our textbooks. But amidst the dusty debates about cranial capacity and jaw width, there is one skull at Denisovans that speaks a language we all understand, the language of the heart. This is Skull 4, often referred to as the Old Man, D. When archaeologists brushed the dirt from his face, they noticed something startling. He had lost all but one of his teeth years before he died. His jawbone had resorbed, the sockets healing over into smooth bone. In the harsh, unforgiving world of the Pleistocene, where survival depended on chewing tough raw meat and fibrous roots, losing your teeth was usually a death sentence. A solitary predator cannot survive on soup when there is no soup. And yet, the old man lived. He survived for years after his teeth were gone. How? The only explanation is that he was not alone. Someone cared for him. We must visualize this scene to truly feel its weight. A younger member of the tribe, perhaps a daughter or a grandchild, taking a piece of raw meat and chewing it in their own mouth until it was soft enough to pass to the old man. Or perhaps they spent hours pounding tubers with a stone to create a mash he could swallow. This act, the sharing of food, the pre-processing of sustenance for a vulnerable member of the group, is the first definitive proof of compassion in the human fossil record. It tells us that by 8 million years ago, we had crossed a different kind of Rubicon. We were no longer just animals surviving the night. We were people who valued each other, not just for utility, but for presence. The old man may have been useless in a hunt, but he held the stories, the memories, and the wisdom of the group. His survival proves that the survival of the fittest had evolved into the survival of the cared for. The Denisovans hominins were small, standing only about 4.5 to 5 feet tall, and their tools were simple, mostly primitive Oldowan flakes rather than the sophisticated hand axes of their African cousins. They seem like an underdog story, small-brained, under-equipped, and venturing into a cold northern latitude filled with terrifying predators. Yet, they thrived. They utilized the caves formed by ancient lava flows, creating secure shelters where they could sleep without fear of the giant cheetahs that patrolled the valley. They likely used simple teamwork to drive predators away from kills, scavenging as much as they hunted. They were the bridge between the tropical origins of humanity and the temperate future that awaited them in Europe and Asia. There is a soft humor in thinking about them, a ragtag band of mismatched explorers who didn't realize they were making history. They were simply trying to stay warm in the Caucasus wind. They remind us that progress in evolution is not always about getting bigger, stronger, or smarter in a straight line. Sometimes it is simply about holding on. The variability of the Denisovans skulls serves as a warning to the splitters of the scientific world. Be careful about naming a new species every time you find a slightly different bone. If we were to fossilize a modern basketball player and a modern gymnast side by side, a future scientist might make the same mistake, assuming they were creatures from different worlds. As the sun dips behind the jagged silhouette of the mountains, casting long shadows over the medieval ruins and the prehistoric pits below, the wind seems to carry the whispers of the old man. He is a ghost who smiles without teeth, a testament to the fact that love, or at least deep social duty, is as old as the stones themselves. We leave Denisovans with a sense of wonder, not just at the diversity of our forms, but at the unity of our spirit. The Georgian mosaic is not just a puzzle of bones, it is a mirror showing us that we have always been a complicated, messy, and caring family. And as the lineage of Homo erectus continued to push westward, deeper into the unknown peninsula of Europe, they would change again, morphing into a new face that would claim the West for nearly 1 million years. The ancestors are moving on, and the face of the past is about to turn its gaze toward the setting sun of the Iberian Peninsula. The camera glides westward now, soaring over the jagged peaks of the Pyrenees and settling into the rugged limestone hills of northern Spain. Here, in the Sierra de Atapuerca, lies a network of caves that act as a time capsule for one of the most controversial and striking members of our family tree. The air is cool and smells of damp earth and pine needles. We are roughly 1.2 million to 800,000 years in the past, in the early Pleistocene of Western Europe. It is here that we meet Homo antecessor, a name that translates with grand ambition to the pioneer, or the one who goes before. When these fossils were first discovered in the Grandolina excavation site in the mid-1990s, the scientific community gasped. The face of Homo antecessor was a shock, literally. If you were to look at a reconstruction of the boy of Grandolina, who died around age 10, you would see a visage that feels eerily familiar. Unlike the flat mask-like faces of the earlier African species or the heavy protruding jaws of the later Neanderthals, antecessor possessed a modern face. They had a sunken cheekbone area known as the canine fossa, a feature that gives our own faces their distinctive topography. It is a face that seems to jump the queue of evolution, appearing nearly 1 million years too early, according to the standard timeline. This uncanny resemblance led the Spanish discoverers to boldly claim that antecessor was the last common ancestor between modern humans and Neanderthals, the great-grandfather that connected the two dynasties. However, the wheel of science turns slowly and often grinds theories to dust. Today, many researchers outside of Spain view Homo antecessor not as our direct ancestor, but as a fascinating dead end, a sister lineage that branched off from the main trunk and ventured into Europe, only to wither away. They are the lost explorers who planted a flag in the West but left no heirs. Genetic analysis from ancient proteins retrieved from tooth enamel in 2020 seems to support this, placing them as a close relative to the common ancestor of humans, Neanderthals and Denisovans, but likely not the ancestor itself. They are the uncle who moved away and was never heard from again. But Homo antecessor is famous, or perhaps infamous, for something far darker than their taxonomy. The bones found at Grandolina tell a grim story that shatters any romanticized notion of the noble savage. Among the remains of bison, deer, and rhinoceros, archaeologists found the scattered bones of antecessor individuals, mostly children and teenagers. These human bones bore the unmistakable marks of stone tools. There were cut marks where flesh had been sliced away from the bone, and percussion fractures where long bones had been smashed open to extract the marrow. They were butchered, and they were butchered with the same casual efficiency as the deer. This is the oldest clear evidence of cannibalism in the human fossil record. But why? Was it a desperate act of starvation during a harsh winter? Was it a ritual to honor the dead? Or was it simply gastronomic cannibalism, treating rivals as just another source of protein? The evidence points uncomfortably to the latter. The bones were tossed into the refuse pile alongside the animal remains, suggesting they were processed as food, plain and simple. And it is a chilling realization that in the struggle for survival, the line between neighbor and prey was sometimes terrifyingly thin. It reminds us that our history is not just one of innovation and empathy, but also of brutal pragmatism. Despite this shadow, Antecessor was a capable survivor. They stood roughly 5.5 feet tall, with a brain size of about 1,000 cubic centimeters, solidly in the middle range of the human story. They navigated a Europe that was a land of extremes, oscillating between warm Mediterranean climates and chilly, dry periods. They used simple tools, lacking the beautiful symmetry of the African hand axes, which suggests they may have lost that technology as they migrated or simply found it unnecessary for their needs. They were scrappy, adaptable, and clearly tough enough to carve out a life on the edge of the known world. There's a strange intimacy in looking at the boy of Grandolina. We know exactly how he died, eaten by his own kind, but we also know how he looked. His face, with its modern cheeks and ancient eyes, stares back at us across the abyss. He represents the many experiments of nature that didn't quite make the final cut. Homo antecessor serves as a humbling marker in our history, a reminder that occupying a continent doesn't guarantee you'll keep it. They held Western Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, living, loving, and fighting, only to vanish around 800,000 years ago. Whether they were outcompeted, froze to death, or simply evolved into something else remains a topic of quiet debate in the dusty halls of museums. As we leave the limestone hills of Spain, the camera pulls back, and time speeds up. The pioneers fade into the fossil record, their modern faces lost to the dark. But the vacuum they left in Europe would not remain empty for long. From the south and east, a new wave was building. A species was evolving that would take the rudimentary spear and turn it into a weapon of terror and precision. They would build the first true shelters, master the art of the ambush, and lay the genetic groundwork for the most famous of all our extinct cousins. The stage is set for the rise of the Heidelberg hunters, the heavyweights of the Middle Pleistocene, who would bridge the gap between the ancient world and the one we recognize. The era of the pioneers ends, the era of the masters begins. The mist hangs low and heavy over the peat bogs of what is now Schöningen, Germany. It is a cool, damp morning, roughly 400,000 years ago, and the silence of the valley is not peaceful. It is pregnant with intent. We have moved forward in time to the Middle Pleistocene, a period often referred to by frustrated paleoanthropologists as the muddle in the middle, because of the chaotic tangle of fossils found during this era. But rising out of this muddle is a figure of undeniable power and clarity, Homo heidelbergensis. If Homo habilis was the scavenger and Homo erectus was the explorer, Homo heidelbergensis is the hunter-king. They evolved likely in Africa around 600,000 years ago before spreading northward, and they represent a massive leap in physical and mental hardware. Standing over 6 feet tall with chests like barrels and muscles that would make a professional wrestler weep with envy, they were built for a world of violent confrontation. Their brains were massive too, averaging about 1,200 cubic centimeters, dangerously close to our own size. They are the direct ancestors of the Neanderthals in Europe, and looking at them, you can see the family resemblance in the heavy brow ridge that shades their eyes like a built-in visor. But the true genius of Homo heidelbergensis is not found in their bones, but in the mud at their feet. Here, preserved by a miracle of anaerobic chemistry, archaeologists found the Schöningen spears. These are not crude, sharpened sticks picked up from the forest floor. They are masterpieces of ballistic engineering. Carved from the dense trunks of spruce trees, they are 6 to 7 feet long and tapered at both ends, with the center of gravity shifted forward, exactly like a modern Olympic javelin. This balance allowed them to be thrown with lethal accuracy over distances of 30 meters. It changes everything we thought we knew about early humans. Before this discovery, we assumed our ancestors were poking at animals from close range. Now we know they were engaging in long-range warfare with nature. Imagine the scene. A herd of wild horses grazes nervously by the lake edge. A group of Heidelbergensis hunters waits in the reeds, perfectly silent. This silence is the loudest proof of their intelligence. To hunt horses, skittish, fast, and dangerous, you cannot simply run at them screaming. You need a plan. You need an ambush. One group drives the herd, the other waits in the trap. This level of coordination requires more than grunts and gestures. It demands language. And indeed, the fossil record offers a tiny, delicate clue: the hyoid bone. This small, horseshoe-shaped bone in the neck, which anchors the tongue and allows for complex speech, is virtually identical in Heidelbergensis to our own. While their voices might have sounded different, perhaps higher-pitched or more resonant due to their massive nasal cavities, they almost certainly spoke to one another. They shared plans, warnings, and perhaps around the fire, the first boasts of a hunt gone right. They were also the first true architects. On the sandy beaches of Terra Amata in Nice, France, evidence suggests they built shelters, oval huts made of stakes driven into the sand, braced with stones and likely covered in hides or brush. This was home, in a way a cave never could be. It was a space they created, defined, and defended. Inside these huts, they processed meat, chipped tools, and slept on furs, protected from the biting wind. It is a cozy image, until you remember the world outside. The Europe of Heidelbergensis was a land of monsters: the cave lion, the cave bear, and the straight-tusked elephant. To survive here required a stoicism and a brutality that is hard to fathom. There is a scholarly tug-of-war regarding their taxonomy that adds a layer of intrigue to their story. Some researchers, the lumpers, view Heidelbergensis as a vast spanning species that includes fossils from Africa, Europe, and Asia, the great-grandfather of everyone. Others, the splitters, argue that the European population is distinct enough to be its own lineage, solely ancestral to Neanderthals, while the African branch is something else entirely. This debate highlights the fluidity of our history. Heidelbergensis is the river that splits, one current flowing toward the Neanderthal ice, the other flowing toward the modern human sun. Despite their heavy brows and immense strength, there is a vulnerability here. Fossil evidence shows many of them suffered from profound dental problems and healed fractures. Their lives were hard and physically punishing. They hunted large game up close when the spears were thrown, grappling with beasts that weighed half a ton. But like the old man of Demonisi, they cared for their own. There are skulls showing teeth worn down to the gum line, suggesting they used their mouths as a third hand to grip hides while scraping them, a lifetime of labor etched into their very enamel. They were a people of immense capability, standing on the threshold of something new. As the climate began to oscillate more violently, swinging between warm interglacials and crushing ice ages, the European Heidelbergensis populations began to change. The cold was coming, and it would sculpt them into the ultimate survivors of the North. But while the North was freezing, something equally momentous was happening back in the ancestral cradle. The African branch of this family tree was about to take a different turn, sharpening its mind and thinning its bones, preparing to give rise to the face we see in the mirror every morning. The Heidelberg hunters bow out of the spotlight, their wooden spears still vibrating in the ground, pointing the way toward the split that would define the next 500,000 years. The camera pans south once more, leaving the misty pine-scented forests of Europe behind to return to the sun-drenched theater of our origin, Africa. While Homo heidelbergensis was adapting to the creeping chill of the north, evolving into the heavy-bodied Neanderthals, their cousins who stayed behind in the tropical heat were taking a very different path. We are back in the Middle Pleistocene, roughly 600,000 to 500,000 years ago, standing on the dusty banks of the Awash River in Ethiopia. The air here vibrates with the drone of cicadas and the distant rhythmic thud of stone on wood. It is here that we meet Homo bodoensis, a recently named species that serves as the crucial bridge, the African architect, that connects the archaic past directly to the modern human future. For decades, the fossil record of this period in Africa was a chaotic drawer of mismatched bones. Scientists lumped them together under various names, often using African Homo heidelbergensis, or the older colonial-tinged term Homo rhodesiensis, named after Rhodesia, now Zambia. It was a scientific wastebasket, a place where difficult-to-classify skulls were tossed and forgotten. But in 2021, a group of researchers proposed a new name to clear the fog: Homo bodoensis. Named after the famous Bodo cranium discovered in Ethiopia in 1976, this species represents the direct lineage of Homo sapiens. If heidelbergensis is the uncle who moved to Europe and toughened up, bodoensis is the grandfather who stayed home and got smarter. The Bodo skull itself is a grim and fascinating artifact. It belonged to a large, robust male with a face that was broad and heavy, possessing a nose so wide it suggests he needed immense airflow to cool his body in the stifling heat. But what truly chills the blood is not his size, but the faint, deliberate scratches etched into his cheekbones and forehead. Microscopic analysis confirms that these are cut marks made by stone tools, applied shortly after his death. Unlike the gastronomic butchery of Homo antecessor in Spain, these cuts are different. They are precise, almost surgical. They suggest that his flesh was removed not for food, but for a reason we can only guess at, perhaps a mortuary ritual, a way to honor the dead, or a practice of curation to keep the skull as a totem. It is a haunting suggestion that the human mind was beginning to traffic in symbols, rituals, and perhaps the first stirrings of a belief in something beyond the physical body. But the true legacy of Homo bodoensis lies in their hands. They are credited with one of the most significant technological leaps in history: hafting. Before this moment, a tool was just a single piece of material, a stone held in the hand or a stick sharpened at the end. Homo bodoensis had the cognitive brilliance to combine them. They learned to nap a triangular stone point, slot it into a wooden handle, and secure it with leather lashings and a glue made from heated plant resin and ochre. This sounds simple to us, accustomed as we are to hammers and screwdrivers, but in the cognitive landscape of the Pleistocene, it was quantum physics. It required hierarchical thinking, the ability to hold two different materials in the mind, understand their separate properties, and visualize a third new object that combines the strengths of both. A stone point is sharp but short, a wooden shaft is long but blunt. Together, they create a spear that is both long and sharp. This invention changed the dynamics of power on the savannah. A hafted spear could be thrust with greater force and durability than a simple sharpened stick. It allowed Homo bodoensis to hunt with a new level of efficiency, bringing down dangerous game like the giant buffalo or the hippopotamus with less risk to themselves. The use of resin, a primitive superglue, also implies a mastery of chemistry. They had to identify the right trees, extract the gum, and heat it to the exact temperature where it became sticky but not brittle. It was the first industrial process, a recipe passed down through generations, whispered from elder to youth over the smoking embers of a fire. Despite these advancements, Homo bodoensis was still a physically robust human. The famous Kabwe skull, often grouped into this lineage, reveals a brow ridge that is one of the thickest ever found, a shelf of bone over the eyes that looks like a heavy bumper on a truck. Yet, the brain behind that brow was expanding, reaching up to 1,300 cubic centimeters. They were becoming less like the upright man and more like us, shedding the heavy musculature of their ancestors in favor of a leaner, more energy-efficient frame. There is a gentle irony in how we view them. We often obsess over the famous extinct humans, the Neanderthals with their cave art, or the hobbits with their tiny stature, while Homo bodoensis is largely ignored by the public. Yet, they are the most important character in our specific story. They are the ones who survived the droughts, who refined the tools, and whose genes eventually mutated into the gracile form of Homo sapiens. They are the authors of the prologue to our own existence. Without their struggle, Without their invention of the composite tool, we would not be here to tell the tale. As the sun sets over the Ethiopian highlands, painting the sky in bands of bruised violet and burning orange, we can imagine a group of Bodoensis hunters returning to camp. They carry the heavy carcass of a gazelle, their stone-tipped spears bloody but unbroken. They are tired, their heavy brows dripping with sweat, but there is a flicker of something new in their eyes, a spark of recognition, a complexity of thought that is beginning to ask why as well as how. The African continent is heating up, both climatically and evolutionarily. The pressure is building. The heavy bones are about to lighten, the brow ridges are about to recede. The architect has laid the foundation, and soon the wise man will step into the house. But before we meet the final survivor, we must turn our gaze back to the cold north, where the European lineage has reached its magnificent tragic peak. The ice is descending, and the kings of the cold are waiting. The wind shifts again, dropping in temperature until it bites the skin with the sharpness of shattered glass. We have left the heat of the African cradle and the temperate forests of the early pioneers to arrive in the heart of the Ice Age. The camera moves across the frozen steppe of Eurasia, a landscape painted in shades of blinding white, steel gray, and the deep bruising blue of glacial ice. It is here, in the shadow of the great ice sheets that swallowed northern Europe, that we meet the most famous, the most misunderstood, and perhaps the most soulful of all our lost cousins, Homo neanderthalensis. Appearing roughly 400,000 to 300,000 years ago, the Neanderthals were the undisputed masters of this frozen kingdom. For centuries, we insulted them. We used their name as a slur for a clumsy, stupid brute. We drew them as hunched, hairy monsters clutching clubs. But modern science has gently wiped away those crude caricatures to reveal a human being of profound complexity, dignity, and intelligence. A person who, if you met them in a suit today, would look perhaps like a very intense rugby player, but certainly not a monster. Physically, the Neanderthal was a masterpiece of cold-weather engineering. Evolution sculpted them to survive where others would freeze. They were shorter than us, averaging about 5'4" or 5", but they were built like tanks. Their bones were thick and heavy, their chests barrel-shaped to hold massive lungs that could warm the freezing air before it hit their vitals. They were wrapped in thick muscle, weighing significantly more than a modern human of the same height. This stocky build follows Allen's rule, a biological principle that states animals in cold climates evolve shorter limbs and compact bodies to retain heat. They were the biological equivalent of a thermos. And then there was the nose, a prominent projecting feature that was huge by our standards. While it might have looked a bit comical, like they had snagged their face on a branch, it served a vital function. It acted as a radiator, humidifying and warming the dry glacial air before it could damage their delicate lungs. Their minds were just as impressive as their bodies. The average Neanderthal brain was actually larger than the average modern human brain, around 1,500 cubic centimeters compared to our 1,350. While size isn't everything, architecture matters more. This statistic alone should silence the dumb caveman jokes. They used this brainpower to pioneer the levallois tool industry, a technique of stone knapping that requires a level of foresight that borders on master-level chess. Instead of just bashing a rock, a Neanderthal napper would carefully shape a core stone, preparing the surface with dozens of precise strikes, calculating angles and physics in their mind. Then, with a single final blow, they would detach a perfect pre-shaped flake. This wasn't just tool-making. It was engineering. It meant they could carry a single prepared core and produce a fresh knife whenever they needed one, rather than lugging around a bag of heavy rocks. Their lives were unimaginably hard. Chemical analysis of their bones reveals they ate almost exclusively meat, top-tier carnivores dining on woolly mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, and bison. To fuel their muscular bodies and massive brains in the freezing cold, a Neanderthal needed roughly 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day, double what a modern active male requires. Essentially, they had to eat a Thanksgiving dinner every single day just to stay alive. To get this meat, they didn't rely on the long-distance projectiles of their African cousins. They used thrusting spears. They got close. They looked the mammoth in the eye. This high-risk hunting style left a pattern of trauma on their skeletons that matches the injuries of modern rodeo riders: broken arms, smashed ribs, and healed concussions. Every meal was a battle. Yet, in the midst of this brutal existence, there was tenderness. The cave of Shanidar in Iraq offers a poignant glimpse into the Neanderthal soul. Here, archaeologists found the remains of Shanidar I, a man who lived to be about 40 or 50 years old, a very old age for the time. He was a wreck of a man, blind in one eye, with a withered right arm that had been amputated or atrophied, and a severe limp. He could not hunt. He could not defend the group. In the harsh calculus of the wild, he should have been left behind. But he wasn't. His injuries had healed. Someone had chewed his food for him. Someone had guided him over the rocky terrain. He was loved. This is the survival of the cared for writ large. There is a beautiful lingering debate among historians about the flower burial at the same Shanidar site. In 1960, soil samples around a grave revealed clumps of pollen from wildflowers, yarrow, cornflower, and hollyhock. For decades, this was cited as proof that Neanderthals laid their dead to rest on a bed of flowers, a gesture of poetic grief. Recently, some killjoy scientists, or rigorous skeptics if you prefer, have suggested that burrowing rodents might have dragged the flowers into the cave. Historians still argue whether this was a funeral rite or just the pantry of a very organized gerbil. But even without the flowers, the fact that they buried their dead at all, protecting them from scavengers, speaks to a belief that a person is more than just meat. Did they have art? For a long time, we said no, claiming that the creative spark was unique to Homo sapiens, but the walls are starting to speak. In caves across Spain, red hand stencils in geometric shapes have been dated to 64,000 years ago, long before we arrived. Deep in the Brunicle cave in France, Neanderthals built mysterious large circles out of broken stalagmites, arranged with a ritualistic precision that defies explanation. They were decorating their world. They wore eagle talons as jewelry and likely adorned themselves with black feathers, presenting a striking Gothic image against the white snow. The tragedy of the Neanderthals is not that they were failures, but that they were not alone. Around 45,000 years ago, a new kind of human drifted into Europe, taller, thinner, with lighter skeletons and more complex projectile weapons. Us. The encounter is one of the great mysteries of prehistory. Did we war with them? Did we outhunt them? Or did we simply love them into extinction? The answer seems to be the latter. We didn't just meet them. We mated with them. Today, if your ancestry is non-African, roughly 1% to 2% of your DNA is Neanderthal. They are not gone. They are in the shape of your skull, the texture of your hair, and the way your immune system fights off a flu. We absorbed them. By 40,000 years ago, the fires in their caves began to flicker out. The last holdouts, perhaps huddled in the caves of Gibraltar, watched the ocean and wondered where the world had gone. They were the victims of their own specialization, adapted perfectly for a world of ice. They struggled as the climate warmed and the agile generalist sapiens swarmed the continent. But tonight, let us honor them not as cavemen, but as the hardy, soulful siblings who kept the Northern Lights company for hundreds of thousands of years. They taught us that you can be tough enough to kill a mammoth and soft enough to care for a crippled elder. As the silence of the European caves deepens, we turn our faces eastward, following the whisper of the wind toward the vast, mysterious plains of Asia. There, in the darkness of a Siberian cave, a tiny finger bone is waiting to tell a story of a ghost lineage we didn't even know existed until a decade ago. The Neanderthals had a cousin, and the mystery of the East is about to unfold. The camera tracks east now, drifting away from the Neanderthal hearths of Europe and soaring over the Ural Mountains into the vast, silent expanse of Siberia. The wind here whispers through the larch trees of the Altai Mountains, carrying us to a limestone portal that overlooks the Anui River. This is the Denisova Cave, a place that looks unassuming, just a dark mouth in the rock face, but which serves as the grand central station of the Stone Age. It is here, in the cool, stable sediment, that history played its greatest magic trick, pulling a brand new species of human out of thin air, or rather, out of a fragment of bone no larger than a pea. We are in the year 2008. Russian archaeologists are sifting through the dust of the cave floor, finding stone tools and animal bones when they uncover a tiny sliver of a pinky finger bone. It belonged to a child, a girl roughly 5 to 7 years old, who lived about 41,000 years ago. Physically, the bone was unremarkable. One might easily have mistaken it for a scrap of a bird or a rodent. But when scientists at the Max Planck Institute in Germany dissolved a portion of it to extract the DNA, the machine spat out a sequence that defied logic. It was not Homo sapiens. It was not Homo neanderthalensis. It was something else entirely, a ghost lineage that had separated from the Neanderthals roughly 400,000 years prior and drifted east. We call them the Denisovans, named after the hermit Denis who once lived in the cave, and they are the first human species identified not by their face, but by their genetic code. They are the ghosts of the East, a people who ruled a vast empire of Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, yet who left behind virtually no physical trace. To date, the entire fossil catalog of the Denisovans could fit comfortably in the palm of one hand. A few massive molars, a sliver of finger bone, a piece of a skull vault, and a jawbone found on the Tibetan plateau. That is it. It is a humbling joke from the universe. We know their entire genome, the color of their eyes, brown, the tone of their skin, dark, and the texture of their hair. Yet if a Denisovan walked into a coffee shop today, we wouldn't know it was them until they smiled. And what a smile it would be. The molars found in the cave are enormous, defying the trends of the time. While other humans were evolving smaller, more efficient teeth, the Denisovans held onto massive grinders that look less like human teeth and more like those of a bear or a very large Australopithecine. It suggests a diet that required immense crushing power, perhaps tough roots or raw frozen meats. Historians still argue whether these massive teeth imply a massive body size to match, imagining the Denisovans as the giants of the ancient world, the Yetis of our family tree. Recent discoveries have begun to flesh out this ghostly outline, specifically with the jawbone found in Baishia Karst Cave in Tibet. This mandible, dated to at least 160,000 years ago, proves that Denisovans were living at high altitudes, over 10,000 feet, long before modern humans arrived. This is a brutal environment where the air is thin and oxygen is scarce. To survive here requires a biological superpower, and the Denisovans had it, a variant of the EPAS1 gene, which regulates the body's production of hemoglobin, preventing the blood from thickening dangerously in low oxygen. It is a stunning example of evolution at work, and the most beautiful part? They gave it to us. Just as we mated with Neanderthals in the West, our ancestors mated with Denisovans in the East. Today, modern Tibetans possess this same rare gene variant, a direct inheritance from these lost cousins that allows them to thrive on the roof of the world. The Denisovans may be gone, but they are literally in the blood of the people who live there today. But the story of the Asian lineage gets even more complicated and cinematic with the entry of the Dragon Man. In the 1930s, during the Japanese occupation of Manchuria, a Chinese laborer working on a bridge in Harbin struck something hard with his shovel. He pulled from the mud a skull, huge, heavy, and terrifyingly complete. It was a human head, but not one he recognized. Fearing it would be taken by the occupying soldiers, he wrapped the skull in cloth and hid it at the bottom of an abandoned well. For 80 years, through a world war, a cultural revolution, and the turn of a millennium, the skull sat in the dark, submerged in water, a secret keeper of the past. It wasn't until the man was on his deathbed in 2018 that he whispered the location to his grandchildren. When scientists finally retrieved and analyzed the Harbin cranium, they were stunned. It is one of the largest human skulls ever found, with a brain capacity of 1,420 cubic centimeters, matching our own, but housed in a structure that is distinctly archaic. It has square eye sockets, a thick brow ridge, and a massive face. This is Homo longi, or Dragon Man, named after the Longjiang, Dragon River region where it was found. Dated to at least 146,000 years ago, Homo longi represents a sophisticated lineage that lived in the freezing forests of northern China. The debate that currently sets the anthropology world on fire is simple. Is Dragon Man actually a Denisovan? The lumpers shout yes. We have a massive skull in China with no DNA and a massive ghost population in China, the Denisovans, with no skull. It fits together like a Cinderella slipper. The massive teeth of the Denisovans would fit perfectly into the massive jaw of the Dragon Man. If this connection is proven, we will finally have a face for the ghosts. We will be able to look into the square eyes of the people who owned the East. However, the splitters urge caution, noting that until we can extract DNA from the Harbin skull or find a matching jaw in Denisova Cave, they must remain separate chapters. Whether they are one species or two, the picture of Asia during the Middle Pleistocene is becoming crowded and vibrant. We must imagine a landscape where these robust humans hunted woolly mammoths on the steppes of Mongolia, fished in the icy rivers of Siberia, and navigated the high-altitude plateaus of the Himalayas. They were likely just as culturally advanced as the Neanderthals, perhaps even more so. A polished bracelet of green chlorite stone found in the Denisova Cave, dated to a layer associated with them, suggests they were drilling stone and creating jewelry with a precision that we previously thought was impossible for archaic humans. It catches the light beautifully, a circle of green stone that once adorned the wrist of a girl who had no idea she was part of a dying breed. There is a profound melancholy in the story of the Denisovans. They were successful, they were widespread, and they were adaptable. They spanned from the chill of Siberia to the tropical humidity of Southeast Asia, as their DNA is found in modern populations in Papua New Guinea and the Philippines. Yet, they vanished. Did they dwindle away as the climate shifted? Were they absorbed completely into the migrating waves of Homo sapiens? We do not see evidence of a great war or a massacre. It is more likely a quiet fading, a breeding out where the smaller population simply dissolved into the larger one, like a drop of ink in a bucket of water. They left us their genes, helping us fight viruses and breathe thin air, and then they stepped back into the shadows of the cave. As we leave the vastness of Asia, the camera zooms in on a single twinkling point of confusion in the south. The narrative of human evolution has so far been a story of big brains win. From habilis to erectus to Neanderthals to Dragon Man, the trend has been clear. Heads get bigger, tools get better. It is a comforting linear progression. But down in South Africa, deep within a cave system that is darker than a moonless night, something was hiding that breaks every rule we just established. A discovery made in 2013 is about to shatter the idea that you need a big brain to be human. We are heading into the Rising Star Cave, and what awaits us there is a mystery that feels almost alien in its strangeness. The ghosts of the East fade, and the star in the dark begins to glow. The camera drops rapidly now, plunging south across the equator, leaving the icy winds of the Russian steppes for the dry, rolling grasslands of South Africa. We find ourselves in the cradle of humankind, a UNESCO World Heritage Site near Johannesburg, where the landscape is riddled with limestone caves that act as the pockets of history, holding on to secrets that the surface world has long forgotten. It is here, in 2013, that the script of human evolution was not just rewritten, it was crumpled up and thrown into the dark. We are entering the Rising Star Cave System, a name that sounds hopeful, almost celestial, but the reality of the place is a claustrophobic nightmare. To reach the chamber where the secret lies, you must squeeze through a chute called Superman's Crawl, a tunnel less than 10 inches high, and then climb a jagged rock spine called the Dragon's Back, before dropping down a narrow vertical chute into pitch blackness. It was in this inaccessible, airless dark that two recreational cavers, Stephen Tucker and Rick Hunter, stumbled upon a bed of bones that would baffle the world. They found Homo naledi. The name means star in the local Sotho language, a poetic nod to the cave, but the creature itself is a paradox wrapped in a mystery. When the first bones were brought to the surface by a team of slender female scientists known as the underground astronauts, the only ones small enough to fit through the chute, paleoanthropologists were confused. They were looking at a creature that seemed to have been assembled from spare parts found in different eras of history. The shoulders were narrow and the fingers were long and curved, adapted for climbing trees like an ancient Australopithecine from 3 million years ago. The hips were flared and primitive. But the feet were virtually indistinguishable from yours or mine, built for long-distance walking. The legs were long and slender. And then there was the skull. It was rounded, like a human's, but it was tiny. The brain volume of Homo naledi was between 460 and 610 cubic centimeters, roughly the size of a large orange or a clenched fist, comparable to the smallest Australopithecines. Based on morphology alone, the experts initially assumed this was a very old species, perhaps a root ancestor from the dawn of the genus Homo, living 2 million years ago. But then the dating results came back, and the scientific community reeled. Homo naledi was not an ancient ancestor. They lived between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago. This was shocking. It meant that while large-brained Homo sapiens were evolving in East Africa and giant-brained Neanderthals were hunting in Europe, a population of small-brained, tree-climbing humans was thriving in South Africa. They were not a missing link, they were a persistent anachronism, a living fossil population that had somehow survived alongside their larger, more advanced cousins. It shattered the linear narrative that brains only get bigger over time. Homo naledi proved that you don't need a massive processor to run a successful survival program. But the physical paradox was nothing compared to the behavioral one. As the team led by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger excavated the Dinaledi chamber, they realized something strange. There were no animal bones, no owl pellets, no hyena scraps, no accidental falls of antelope. There was no evidence of water transporting the bones into the cave. There was only naledi. Over 1,500 fossil elements were recovered, representing at least 15 individuals ranging from infants to elderly adults. How did they get there? The chute is too narrow for a predator to drag a body down. The only plausible explanation, according to the team, was that Homo naledi was deliberately disposing of their dead. They were carrying the bodies of their loved ones through the terrifying dark, squeezing through the tightest gaps and dropping them into this remote chamber to keep them safe. This hypothesis ignited a firestorm of controversy that continues to burn. Historians and scientists still argue whether a creature with a brain the size of a chimpanzee's is capable of such complex ritualistic behavior. Intentional burial is supposed to be the hallmark of modern cognition, a sign of symbolic thinking and a recognition of mortality. Skeptics argued that perhaps there was another, now collapsed entrance, or that we are projecting our own emotional need for ritual onto a simple act of corpse hygiene, dumping rotting bodies to keep the campsite clean. But the Rising Star team has doubled down. In recent years, they have claimed to find evidence of hearths, controlled fire, deep in the cave, and even crude symbols, hash marks etched into the rock walls above the graves. If true, this overturns everything. It suggests that the human spark, the capacity for art, ritual, and reverence, is not the result of having a big brain. It might be something else entirely, an emotional software that runs on even the most basic hardware. Imagine the scene. A small, wiry naledi individual, holding a torch of burning twigs, navigating the twisting dark of the cave. The smoke stings their eyes, but they press on, carrying the limp body of a child. They are not doing this for food, nor for warmth. They are doing it because the body matters. In the flickering light of the torch, they reach the chute, the star chamber, and lower the burden down. It is a moment of profound solemnity. If this happened, and the evidence is mounting that it did, then the definition of humanity must be widened to include these small climbing star people. It humbles us. It tells us that grief is not a function of IQ. The existence of Homo naledi also forces us to rethink the landscape of the Middle Pleistocene. We often picture our ancestors marching alone toward modernity, but the reality was a busy, dangerous neighborhood. It is entirely possible that early Homo sapiens encountered Homo naledi. Did they trade? Did they ignore each other? Or did the larger humans see the smaller ones as spirits of the forest, strange hybrids of ape and man? The fact that naledi survived until relatively recently, geologically speaking, suggests they were masters of their niche. Perhaps their small size was an advantage, allowing them to live on fewer calories, while their tree-climbing ability gave them a refuge that the heavy ground-bound sapiens couldn't access. There is a gentle humor in the fact that we almost missed them. The Rising Star Cave had been explored by cavers for decades. People had crawled right over the bones, mistaking them for rubble, or simply stopped before the difficult Superman's crawl. Homo naledi was right there, under our feet, waiting for the right person to look a little deeper. They remind us that the map of human history is still full of blank spaces, labeled "Here be dragons," or in this case, "Here be star people." As we leave the dark, quiet chambers of South Africa, climbing back up the chute toward the blinding sunlight of the surface, we carry with us a new understanding of what it means to be human. It is not about the size of the hat you wear. It is about what you do in the dark when no one is watching. Homo naledi has dimmed the spotlight on our own ego, showing us that complex feelings and deep traditions might be older and more universal than we ever dared to dream. But the surprises of the late Pleistocene are not finished. The mainland of Africa and Eurasia is crowded, yes, but if we cast our gaze outward toward the Emerald Islands of Southeast Asia, we find that evolution was playing an even wilder game. Isolation does strange things to biology. It shrinks giants and stretches dwarfs. We are heading to the islands of the hobbits, where the rules of reality seem to bend like palm trees in a storm. The air thickens with humidity as we leave the dry grasslands of Africa and drift eastward, crossing the Indian Ocean to the Emerald Archipelago of Indonesia. We are approaching the island of Flores, a place that feels less like a geographical location and more like a lost page from a fantasy novel. Here, the rules of biology seem to have been suspended, or at least rewritten by a whimsical author. The year is 2003, and a team of Australian and Indonesian archaeologists are digging in a vast limestone cavern known as Liang Bua, or the Cool Cave. 2. They are searching for evidence of the first modern human migration to Australia, expecting to find the usual stone tools or perhaps a standard-issue human bone. Instead, roughly 6 meters down in the damp clay, they find a skeleton that makes no sense. It is an adult female, but she stands only 1 meter tall, about 3 feet 6 inches. Her brain is shockingly small, roughly 400 cubic centimeters, the size of a chimpanzee's or a grapefruit. Yet, she is not a monkey. She is distinctly, undeniably human. They name her Homo floresiensis, but the world immediately and affectionately crowns her the Hobbit. Entering the world of the hobbits requires us to understand the strange magic of islands. Biologists call it the island rule, or Foster's rule. When a species is trapped on an island with limited resources and few predators, strange things happen. Big animals shrink to survive on less food, and small animals grow huge to fill empty niches. On Flores, this rule created a surreal ecosystem. Giant storks stood 6 feet tall, rats grew to the size of dogs, and elephants, specifically a genus called Stegodon, shrank until they were the size of cows. And humans? They shrank too. Whether they arrived as tall Homo erectus and dwarfed over millennia, or arrived as already small primitive ancestors, remains a hot debate. But the result was a population of tiny humans who lived in the shadow of volcanoes, navigating a landscape that looked like a distorted mirror of the mainland. Despite their tiny brains, The hobbits were not simpletons. This is the great lesson of Flores. Neurological architecture matters more than volume. The excavations at Liang Bua revealed that they crafted stone tools, used fire, and most impressively, hunted the pygmy elephants. Imagine the coordination required for a group of 3-foot-tall humans to bring down a 1,000-pound stegodon. It implies language, planning, and courage. They were the masters of their miniature domain, surviving on this island for hundreds of thousands of years, until as recently as 50,000 years ago. This date is crucial. It means they were alive when Homo sapiens were expanding through Southeast Asia. We likely looked them in the eye. This possibility brings us to one of the most shivering intersections of myth and reality in our entire journey. For centuries, the Nog people of Flores have told stories of the Ebu-Gogo, small, hairy, grandmother-like creatures who lived in the caves, muttered in a strange language, and would steal food or even children. The locals described them as walkers who were fast runners but clumsy. For years, anthropologists dismissed these stories as mere folklore, the boogeymen invented to scare children. But after the discovery of Homo floresiensis, the laughter stopped. The physical description of the Ebu-Gogo matches the scientific reconstruction of the hobbits with unnerving accuracy. Historians and folklorists still argue whether these legends are actually preserved memories, oral histories passed down for 50,000 years, documenting the time when modern humans shared the forest with a different kind of person. It is a thought that makes the hair on your arms stand up, that our myths might be the ghosts of our history. But Flores was not the only laboratory of evolution. As we glide north across the sea to the Philippines, we descend into the Callao Cave on the island of Luzon. Here, in 2019, another shockwave hit the scientific community. Archaeologists identified yet another distinct species, Homo luzonensis. Like the hobbits, they were small-bodied, likely a result of the same island pressures. But Homo luzonensis is even more confusing. Their teeth look incredibly modern, similar to yours or mine, but their feet and hands possess curved phalanges, finger and toe bones that are curved for climbing trees. This feature hasn't been seen in the human lineage for millions of years, not since the days of the Australopithecines like Lucy. How did a human living 67,000 years ago in the Philippines have the feet of a 3-million-year-old ancestor? It suggests a phenomenon called mosaic evolution, where different body parts evolve at different rates. Or it implies that these islanders descended from a migration of primitive humans that left Africa long before Homo erectus, a migration we have absolutely no other record of. It is as if the islands of Southeast Asia were a refugium, a safe harbor where ancient traits could linger and strange new forms could evolve in isolation, protected by the barrier of the ocean. There is a whimsical, almost playful quality to this chapter of our history. It reminds us that evolution is not a straight march toward bigger and better. It is a branching bush full of dead ends and strange loops. The hobbits and the Luzon humans prove that humanity is a flexible concept. You can be small, you can have a tiny brain, you can climb trees like an ape, and yet still be a tool-using, fire-making, elephant-hunting person. They challenge our arrogance. We often think of ourselves as the inevitable pinnacle of creation, the only way a human can be. But if you had visited Flores 60,000 years ago, you would have seen a successful, thriving society of people who looked nothing like us. They weren't failed humans. They were just different humans, perfectly adapted to their green volcanic home. The isolation that created them also doomed them. Islands are fragile. A change in climate, a volcanic eruption, or the arrival of a new, highly competitive invasive species, can wipe out an island population in the blink of an eye. Around 50,000 years ago, the fires in Liang Bua Cave went cold. The stegodon vanished. The Ebu-Gogo retreated into the realm of whispers. The rich tapestry of human diversity, which had been woven so complexly across Africa, Europe, and Asia, was beginning to unravel. The stage was being cleared. One by one, the candles of our cousins were snuffed out, the cold-adapted Neanderthals, the ghost-like Denisovans, the star-collecting Naledi, and the tiny islanders. As the sun sets over the lush canopy of Luzon, casting long shadows that seem to hide secrets we may never find, we are left with a profound sense of solitude. The crowded house of the Pleistocene is emptying. The noise of the family reunion is quieting down. We are approaching the final chapter of the story, the moment when the timeline narrows to a single thread. The camera pulls back to reveal the whole Earth, a blue marble spinning in the dark, and on its surface, one final figure stands up, looking around at a world that is suddenly terrifyingly quiet. The era of diversity ends, the era of loneliness begins. The mist of time begins to thin, and the camera focuses on the final actor stepping onto the stage. We return to the continent where it all began, Africa. But the date is a surprise. For a long time, we believed our own story started around 200,000 years ago in East Africa. However, the desert sands of Jebel Irhoud in Morocco recently whispered a different truth, revealing skulls that push our origin back to at least 300,000 years ago. Here, in the cradle of the Middle Pleistocene, Homo sapiens emerges. We are the wise man, though looking at us then, you might simply call us the gracile man. Compared to the tank-like build of the Neanderthals or the thick-browed stoicism of Heidelbergensis, we are lightly built. Our bones are thinner, our faces are flatter, and we possess a defining feature that no other human has ever had: a jutting chin. But the most radical change is the shape of our head. It is globular, rounded like a soccer ball, housing a brain that has been rewired for a new kind of connectivity. This internal rewiring sparked what some anthropologists call the cognitive revolution. While our cousins were geniuses of survival, masters of the spear and the scraper, Homo sapiens began to do things that had no immediate survival value. We began to dream. In the Blombos Cave of South Africa, dating back 73,000 years, we find a stone flake marked with a cross-hatched pattern of red ochre, a hashtag from the dawn of time. It is the first drawing. It means nothing, and therefore, it means everything. It signifies a mind capable of abstract thought, of imposing meaning onto the material world. We pierced snail shells to make necklaces, painting our bodies and our weapons. We were not just living in the world, we were decorating it, singing to it, and telling stories about it. When the climate opened the gates of the Sahara roughly 60,000 to 50,000 years ago, we poured out of Africa, not as a trickle, but as a wave. We carried with us a secret weapon more powerful than fire or stone: the social network. While Neanderthals lived in small, isolated family groups, Homo sapiens maintained connections across vast distances. We traded seashells over hundreds of miles. If a famine hit one valley, we could call upon distant in-laws in another. We turned strangers into fictive kin. This ability to cooperate with people we had never met based on shared myths and beliefs allowed us to swarm the world. As we spread, we met them. The encounter was not a single dramatic battle, but a slow, grinding friction of biology. In Europe, we met the Neanderthals. In Asia, the Denisovans. In the islands, the hobbits. For a few thousand years, the world was a shared space. We shared beds, as evidenced by the DNA we still carry, but we also competed for the same deer, the same caves, and the same firewood. And slowly, tragically, the lights of our cousins went out. Historians and scientists still argue whether it was our violence, our diseases, or simply our superior efficiency that doomed them. Perhaps we were just better at extracting calories from the environment, leaving nothing behind for the specialists. The Neanderthals, adapted for the cold, could not adapt to us. The Denisovans, masters of the high peaks, could not outclimb our expansion. One by one, the other 13 voices in the human choir fell silent. By 12,000 years ago, as the ice sheets retreated and the Holocene began, we were alone. Homo floresiensis was gone. Homo naledi was dust. The Red Deer Cave people of China, a mysterious late surviving population, had faded. For the first time in millions of years, there was only one way to be human. We are the survivors of a tournament we didn't realize we were fighting. We are the last man standing. It is a lonely victory. When we look at the diversity of the animal kingdom, the many species of cats, of bears, of finches, our solitude feels unnatural. We are a biological oddity, a single twig left on a once mighty bush, and yet we carry the ghosts of the others inside us. When you feel a chill and your skin bumps, you're using a reflex from a hairy ancestor who needed to fluff their coat. When you crave sugar, you are obeying the hunger of a forager on the savannah. When you feel the urge to protect a vulnerable stranger, you are channeling the compassion of the old man of Demonisi. We are a mosaic of all who came before. So, how many species of humans were there? The strict count gives us 13. Habilis, Rudolfensis, Ergaster, Erectus, Gorgicus, Antecessor, Heidelbergensis, Bodoensis, Neanderthalensis, Denisova, by genetics, Naledi, Floresiensis, and Luzonensis. If we accept the dragon man, Homo longi, as distinct, the count rises to 14. If we split the African and Asian erectus, or the various early Homo fossils, it could be 20. But the number matters less than the realization. We are not the inevitable rulers of the earth, destined from the start. We are the lucky survivors of a chaotic, beautiful, and crowded family history. We are the ones who happen to be holding the right tools with the right social habits when the climate rolled the dice. Now, tonight, as you lie in the safety of your home, surrounded by the technology that started with a chipped rock in the hands of a handyman, try to feel the weight of that heritage. You are the result of millions of years of struggle. You are the dream of 1,000 ancestors who froze, fought, and loved so that you could exist. The crowd is gone, but their echo remains in the rhythm of your own heart. The story of humanity is not a story of solitude. It is a story of a great, boisterous, difficult family that walked across the earth trying to find a way to stay warm. And in you, they finally found it. The fire has burned down to embers now, casting a soft, pulsing glow against the walls of our shared imagination. The camera stops moving. The wind across the savannah, the whistle of the Ice Age blizzard, the hum of the jungle. It all quiets down, replaced by the steady, comforting sound of your own breathing. We have walked a long road tonight, stepping over millions of years, meeting cousins who looked at the moon with the same wonder you do. It is a lot to carry, this history, but you don't have to carry it anymore. You can set it down. Let the names and the dates dissolve like sugar in warm water. Let the heavy brows and the stone tools fade into the velvet darkness. All that matters now is that you are here, safe, warm, and part of an unbroken chain of life that has survived every storm the universe could throw at it. You are the resting place of history. The ancestors are not watching you with judgment. They are watching over you with relief. They have done the hard work. They have run the races, fought the beasts, and endured the cold so that you could have this moment of softness. Sleep now, knowing that you are never truly alone. The night is not empty. It is full of the quiet, protective presence of all those who came before. Drift into the dark, wrapped in the blanket of deep time. You have earned your rest. Sweet dreams.